Now, since the discovery of crude oil in Nigeria in 1956, it has become one of the country's biggest exports. Nigeria currently ranks as one of the largest exporters of crude oil in Africa, and with a deposit that is limitless, can be even greater in its oil production. However, whatever Nigeria has in its petroleum abundance is even bigger in natural gas, an area of its endeavour that has been barely tapped into despite holding global promises. Nigeria's oil boom of the 1970s and 1980s is over, and petroleum production in the country at the moment is a venture that can't meet its economic demands. Blessed with one of the most youthful demographics in the world, the new age of technological evolution promises greatness. Agriculture, other mineral resources, and strengthening its productive capacity have been mentioned as ways for Nigeria to grow. Now, joining me on the program tonight is Dr. Muda Yusuf, CEO, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, as we discuss Nigeria's need for diversification, as advised by the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Thank you very much for joining us on the program, Dr. Muda Yusuf. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure as well.
Now, Dr. Yusuf, considering the current global energy landscape, what long-term implications can be expected if incoming governors fail to heed Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala's advice on diversifying revenue sources away from crude oil?
Well, it's going to pose a major risk of sustaining governance at the sub-national levels. Even right now, some of the states are already at that threshold. Some of them are almost 90% dependent on FAC allocation. For most of them, once they pay salaries for civil servants and political appointees, there's practically nothing left in their coffers. And unlike the federal government, it's not so easy for them to borrow. So the outlook is quite challenging for many of the states, particularly, just as you said, now that we are talking about decarbonization and all of that. But in any case, thanks to what is happening in Ukraine and Russia and Ukraine, which has shot up the price of crude oil. But for how long will that be sustained? So there's a lot of wisdom in thinking about how to diversify revenue sources and how to ensure that many of these things are less reliant on federal allocation. But in this kind of conversation, there are issues that are within the control of the states. There are also factors that are not within their control.
Would you like to share with us?
Yeah, when we look at these things, our approach has to be a lot more comprehensive. For instance, the structure of the federation itself, as we have it now, although we call it a federal system or a federal system of government, it is essentially a unitary system. Because we have situations where practically all the key resources that even belong to the states, whatever resources they have is being controlled by the center.
Yes.
And some critical components of revenue generation, like company tax, like VAT, like education tax, like all manner of taxes. Most of these taxes, import duty and the rest of them. Although it's not exclusively federal, but everything goes to the center. So the states also have very limited powers over resources in their domain. And that is why this conversation around restructuring and fiscal federalism is also critical in the context of this conversation. Because if you look at some of the states, where some of them have mineral resources, they have all manner of resources, but they don't have power over such resources. For instance, if any of the states have any mineral resources, even something as elementary as a quarry. They don't have full powers.
It goes to the center.
The license for you to operate a quarry will have to come from the center. So when you have over concentration of powers at the center, it also does not allow the states to be able to be more creative, to be able to express themselves very well in terms of revenue generation. Of course, this is not to excuse the fact that they cannot do better than what they are doing at the moment. Of course, they can do better. And they can also do better by cutting their cost of governance. Many of them have, very unwieldy bureaucracy, unwieldy political appointees, a lot of leakages of even the very little resources they have. So there are issues along those sides as well, which is within the control of the states. But there are factors that are beyond them. Take the issue of insecurity. There are some states now, there's no way you can get an investor to go there because of the problem of insecurity. The states are not in charge of security. They don't have powers. So how do we want them to generate revenue in such states? So we need to be more holistic and more comprehensive when we talk about this kind of issues.
Now, Dr. Yusuf, how vulnerable are states heavily reliant on this monthly allocation to potential fluctuations in oil prices and global demand? And what measures can be taken to mitigate such vulnerability? What are some specific strategies and initiatives that states can adopt to successfully diversify their resources and reduce their dependence on the central government, going cap in hand in Abuja every month? You did talk about some of the things that are on the exclusive and concurrent list and that are preventing them from being more creative. But what can they do? What practical steps can these state governments do?
Well, apart from the constitutional limitations, which I alluded to earlier, of course, I expect that going forward, we need to address that issue of, fiscal federalism and restructuring. But beyond that, the states need to be a lot more creative in the sense that they can do a lot more to improve their investment environment. Because growing the economy is about attracting investment. Growing the IGR is about attracting investment. Because if there are no investments in your domain, who are you going to tax? Where are you going to get the revenue from? So they need to put incentives on the table to be able to attract investment. And one low-hanging fruit is incentives around issues of land administration, land documentation, and all of that. There are some investments, things like the agro-allied industries. For many of the states that are basically agrarian, they can encourage a lot of agro-processing industries, to come to their states, and they offer very generous, incentives as far as access to land is concerned. Many of them, unlike Lagos, many of them have vast expanse of land. So that is one thing that they can do, and they can also support such investment through other incentives, reducing some of their state levies and all of that. That is one thing that they can do. So there's a whole lot that can be done in terms of creating the enabling environment for investors, to come to their states. That is one thing that they can do. And of course, working with the federal government, we have seen now some amendment to the Constitution. Some critical items have been moved from the exclusive list to the concurrent list.
And I believe power generation is among those critical items. Hello, Dr.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, there's power generation, there is the railway system, there is airports and things like that. Those things, it has been opened up now, at least. There is no more serious constitutional limitations. So they can go out there and seek for investors to come and partner with the states to be able to provide powers for their people. If the state is viable enough, can get the state to set up airports. The state capital, again, is viable enough, they can embark on some railway system, no matter at whatever scale. So leveraging on what we call the public-private partnership is one way that many of the states can go, to partner with the private sector and look at areas where the opportunities exist. Then, take advantage of that. That can help them to grow investment. So that is also very important. Then the state should also, we need to press, even while this current structure lasts, the state also needs to advocate for a review of the revenue allocation formula. How can we have a situation where almost over 50% of revenue is going to the federal government?
But Dr. Yusuf, some have argued that if you give these governors more money, they will squander it, and they've not showed a lot of, they've not shown prudence in the way they spend the 50% they're getting from the central government. What's your take on that observation?
No, that is not enough reason to deprive them of their resources, and that is a sweeping generalization. It's not all of them that are behaving that way. And in any case, at the federal level, don't we have issues of corruption and looting? That is not enough. What is important is that the citizens themselves must hold their leaders accountable at all levels, at the state level, at the local government level, at the federal level. So that is the responsibility of the citizens.
But some of these oil-producing states and resource-rich states get a derivation fund, about 13% extra than other states. Is it not good enough?
No, for them, but what percentage are they? All of them, maybe they're not more than 5 states or so. And only about 3 of them are really making so much money. But again, there are issues of accountability at those states, at the level of those states. It is the responsibility of the citizens to demand accountability. And I'm happy that at least the electorates, the citizens are becoming more aware. Electorates are becoming more sophisticated. They are becoming more demanding. They are now asking questions. We need to sustain that tempo, that momentum of asking for transparency, of demanding for accountability. There is no reason why states like Bayelsa, Rivers, Delta, the kind of poverty we see in some of those states, it's very difficult to justify. Given the amount of resources that we have there, given all the investment, so-called investment, the derivation, the NDDC, the amnesty program, the Ministry of Niger Delta, you go there, there's really nothing on ground. So, and some of them, as we speak, depend almost to between 80 to 90% on federal allocation. What do they have to show? So the states, citizens need to hold their leaders accountable. But having said that, the revenue allocation, I think, should be a lot fairer than what it is. We cannot continue to have so much resources at the center, where so many states and local governments are sharing maybe around 40% or so. I think that is not good enough.
Okay. Now, Dr. Yusuf, you were the head of the Lagos State Chamber of Commerce and Industry. From your experience, can you share any success stories or best practices from other countries or regions that have effectively diversified their revenue resources, which Nigerian states can draw at least some type of inspiration from?
No, the best practices are in countries where you have true federalism. You have a lot of examples in the United States, maybe in Canada, states, countries where proper federalism takes place. And the reality is that not all the states are equally endowed. A state like California, for instance, is much richer than many of the other states in America. Not all states are equally endowed. But what is important is for the states to realize their competitive strength, the competitive advantage they have, the kind of resources they have, and make sure that they focus on that and attract investment into those areas. So in countries where you have true federalism, of course, there are excellent examples that you can see. And the good thing about such a structure of government is that there's also some level of political competition. Each state tries to do better than the other. There's a lot of peer review that takes place. They learn from each other. So those things help the growth and advancement of the subnationals. So having a true federal structure is a precondition to achieving what you just said, where you can get the states to do a lot more and to be a lot more creative in the way they grow their investment and grow their revenues.
Now, looking at having the luxury of hindsight and knowing how things played out since we discovered crude oil, you just mentioned the best practices of healthy competition between this states. Would you say oil, the discovery of crude oil, has been a curse for Nigeria? Because I believe in the First Republic, we had something similar to what you were saying, the granite pyramids in the north, the cocoa plantations in the southwest and all of that. How did we get to this point?
No, I don't think oil is a cause. You can't say that oil was a cause. I've heard that term being used by a number of people. I think the biggest challenge, I don't want to call it a cause, is bad leadership. That is it, it's bad leadership. Look at what other countries, particularly in the Middle East, look at what they have done with oil. They have so well invested their oil proceeds from oil to the fact that they now rely much less on proceeds from oil. Because they utilize what they got from oil to diversify the economy, to build infrastructure, to strengthen their security, to attract a lot of investment, and to make their countries tourist destination. Whether business tourism or other forms of tourism. They leverage the oil and gas resource that they had. So the problem is not with the resources, the problem is with the managers of the resources. So it is the leadership that really will make the difference. So, the states, the leadership is to blame for where we find ourselves today. Just look at the oil and gas space in Nigeria. We don't have any functioning refineries. None. For the past 10 years, none of the refineries have functioned. How do you explain that? And look at what is costing the country. They are spending over $10 to $15 billion annually to be importing petroleum products. That is scandalous. Look at the challenges that's created for us in the area of subsidy, then all the corruption around the entire ecosystem of oil and gas, importation, distribution, sale, equalization fund, and all of that. These are very grave failure of governance.
Now, Dr. Yusuf, I'm happy you mentioned.
What has brought us to this level.
I'm happy you mentioned the issue of refineries and oil and gas sector. The Dangote Petrochemical Refinery will be online in a matter of few weeks. Mr. President is set to commission it. How much of a relief would it be to the Nigerian oil and gas sector and the economy in a whole? Is it a game changer?
Of course, it will be a game changer. There's no doubt. And it will save us the trouble and the foreign exchange of having to go and be importing petroleum products. It's going to domesticate a lot of jobs, a lot of employment here. It's going to generate a lot of revenue. It's going to give Nigerians opportunity to also be part of it. Because I expect that very soon the shares will be listed on the Nigerian on the stock exchange in the country. It's going to be a major game changer. But let me caution that it's not going to put Nigeria in a position to be able to sustain the subsidy as we have. The subsidy philosophy or theory is not compatible with the business model of Dangote. Completely not compatible. The business model is that of a purely private sector business. They have their shareholders, they have their creditors that they have to pay, they have dividends to pay, they have debts to pay. So we cannot be talking of subsidy within the framework of what Dangote is doing. So it depends on if the government still want to carry the burden of subsidy, then there has to be a negotiation to be able to, properly compensate Dangote, either by giving discounted crude, giving crude at a discounted rate, or whatever, so that Dangote can supply the products at the concessionary rate. But as a private sector, I don't expect any subsidy to be coming directly from the Dangote Refinery.
I mean, they're in the business of making profit and not a charitable organization. Now, Dr. Yusuf, how can governors strike a balance between diversifying revenue resources and leveraging existing economic structures in their states? What sectors or industry show potential for growth and diversification if you look at the country as it is today?
No, different states are differently endowed. I mean, if you talk of agriculture, if you go up north from the middle belt up, there's a whole lot of opportunities. So we should be looking more in the area of agro-allied industries. If you come down south, if you look at major commercial centers, it is the service industry that is driving the economic activities or growth in those sectors. You know, we are talking about digital economy, we are talking about financial services, insurance, maritime, and all of that. Those are the things that are predominant in the southern part of the country. And we have areas where we have a lot of crude oil and all of that. Again, there are industries that can grow there. Then you have some states that have a lot of properties. Many of them are not taking advantage of taxing those properties. I mean, if you go abroad, I mean, once you have a property, you know how much you pay. And most of the municipal cities or states that have huge investment in properties like Abuja, Lagos, maybe Port Harcourt and all of that, they can do a lot more by raising revenue from properties. How can we have properties that are worth billions of naira sitting down there and they are not paying any tangible tax? It's not poor people that have put up those kind of properties. It's not poor people that occupy those properties. At least if you don't have access to their income, you have access to their assets. And you tax it. So you can provide more facilities for the people, for the citizens of the state. So that is one area that some states, or many of the states, are not taking advantage of. I don't know why that is so. Maybe because the owners of the properties are also politicians or bureaucrats. I don't know why. But in many other climes, property tax or property is a major source of revenue for the states.
Now, Dr. Yusuf, what specific measures and support should the federal government of Nigeria provide to states in their efforts to diversify revenue and rebuild trust? And how can these measures be effectively implemented?
I think one of the measures is what I said earlier. We should, we should be a proper federation. We should decongest the exclusive list. This administration has already taken steps in such areas. So a lot more can be done. I mean, that is key. Secondly, the federal government has a lot more to do in the area of providing security. As I said earlier, some states cannot attract investment today because there is no security. The states don't have the resources or the capacity to ensure adequate security cover for lives and property. So it is for the federal government to focus on that and ensure that we have protection of lives and property. Then there's some major infrastructure that connects all the states together. The federal government has a role to play there so that you have better connectivity, among all the states so that they can move from one state to the other. Those things have a way of bringing a lot of value, not just to the national economy, but even to the economies of the subnationals. Then issues of policy. Policy is in the domain of the federal government. Foreign exchange policy is one of the biggest problems investors are facing today. If it is better, the states will do better. Investors in their states will do better. You have our trade policy, we have a problem with the ports. These things are within the domain of the purview of the federal government. These things are also affecting investors across all the states. So these are some of the things that the federal government can do. We also have issues with the monetary policy. So in the policy environment, in the regulatory environment, the federal government can do a lot. So once we improve the macroeconomic environment, the states will be able to leverage on that, to be able to grow investment and grow revenue. So these are some of the things that the federal can do to support the states.
So a very symbiotic relationship. Both sides need each other, and the federal government also needs to step up in its responsibility. Thank you very much, Dr. Muda Yusuf, CEO, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise. Thank you very much for your time and for
Thank you very much, my friend.
your insights. Thank you.